Hello, welcome to this first class Dynamics of Astrology. How is everyone? How are you?
We're all doing good as far as I know. I think I'm doing good. How are you, Dave?
Yeah, I'm very good as well. Nice and hot and overheating. Yeah,
Overheating. Oh, well, we don't want all that overheating stuff now.
no, it's good to see you all. Welcome to this beginning of an astrological adventure into the nature of life and ourselves. Um, Uh, Obviously, this first class is just going to kind of introduce us to the topic in a gentle and easy way. Um, and we'll get deeper and more complex as we go forwards. And astrology itself is a very complex topic, but then I guess it has to be, doesn't it? Because we have a choice with astrology. We can be brief or we can be accurate. Hmm. How many of you like the idea of preferring inaccurate astrology? Anybody here a fan of inaccuracy? No? Okay. Then that means if you want something that's going to accurately reflect the complexity and sophistication of your foibles, idiosyncrasies, and contradictions, then that means it has to be able to kind of do that. And the topic itself, the mirror itself, has to be that complex, because it's not enough just to say that someone is like this or someone is like that, because we're not just a like this or a like that. We're not nouns, we're more like verbs. We change through time, we grow through time. So something that suits us when we're 17 might not suit us when we're 34. A holiday that we might go on when we're 19 might not be the same when we're 63. You never know, but it might not be the same. Then again, it might, right? But generally, what you find is as people move through time, their values change, their knowledge of the world changes, their map or their model of reality changes. So how they relate with the world changes, and therefore their relationships change. So anything that's going to describe us to any degree of accuracy, by definition, has to be able to describe all of that. And it's very difficult to express all of that very quickly. Otherwise, well, not without sounding like a kind of frantically speeded up tape recorder that only a dog can hear. And my students over the years have kind of wished that there's some kind of USB link where we could just, or a Vulcan mind meld thing you can do, just to kind of download stuff. But unfortunately, we can't do that at this juncture in our history. So we have to do the talking thing, and it does take a bit of time. But it's fun to do this stuff in full consciousness. At least I hope it is. So now, astrology as a topic, like I said, is a very complex thing. So I guess the place to start is at its name itself. The word astrology can be broken down into two parts, astral and logos. Astral referring to the heavens, and as you know, logos means a body of knowledge. So the two words together, astral logos, means knowledge of the heavens. Through this introduction course, we'll look at the way that modern astrologers might approach astrology, but we'll also look at the ancient ways of viewing information. And I don't just necessarily mean viewing astrology, but how people would look at reality itself. You know, so some of you, for example, might be inspired to want to look around for more information. I know there's a book list. We're going to discuss the book list next week, right? But some of you might be too impatient to wait for a book or to chat about some books, so you might look around online. And some of the things you find online will be of high merit, and some of the things you find online might not be of such high merit, right? So I always think that all human skills have a range of competence, right? Everything we do, from plumbing to architecture, believe it or not every person who's called a leader can lead. Man, who would have thought that? Not all teachers can teach, by the way. So I hope you find that my teaching style is easy and compatible for you. But if you we liken a scale of sophistication from, say, like to use music as a scaling, right? So if you've got, I don't know, the X Factor or American Idol at one end of the scale of sophistication, and Beethoven at the other end of the scale of sophistication, and perhaps Led Zeppelin or Gilbert and Sullivan somewhere in the middle, right? Um, then a lot of the things you find on the internet are of kind of like the X Factor or American Idol end. So the reason for mentioning the books in the book list is so that you can have a first kind of call on some very high quality information. And that means then that when you look at the other things on the internet, you can then compare them to the high quality information you've got, and that will give you a benchmark of, a kind of like yeah, of something you can follow, because otherwise it's very hard to know what's worthy and what isn't. So I'd avoid looking at websites to begin with. But if you do happen to look at any websites, you might find yourself looking at some websites that talk about the tradition of astrology. And as soon as you start to look back in time, this subject's been around for a good couple of thousand years and a bit more than that, really. So as you look back at the texts that have been written over the centuries, of course, to understand really what they mean, you have to position yourself into their time frame, and I'll explain that a bit more as we kind of go along. So we'll look at ancient ways of viewing the cosmos as well. Our relationship with the celestial sphere has changed. Certainly with the development of telescopes, we can see more of what's there. And so therefore we have more symbols now. So that means that astrology itself, the language of it, has grown and developed over a period of time. And we're going to look at all of this through two principal strands of exploration. Man. You could, in one way, you could say left brain and right brain, or logos and mythos. Right? And it's important to look at both of these because astrology seems to comprise equally of both of these two different ways of thinking as a virtuous approach. Now I'm a bit of a strange person. I have a Master of Arts. I was one of the first 6 people in history to get a Master of Arts degree in Cultural Astronomy and Astrology. But I also have an MSc, a Master of Science in Psychosocial Studies. So I was at a conference, probably about 10, 11 years ago, and I'd just been given the mark for my MSc. And I was really kind of chuffed because I got a distinction for the degree overall. And I was at a conference called the Inspiration of Astronomical Phenomena, and having a cup of tea and a break with one of the other speakers. And I said, yeah, I've just been told today that I've got my distinction for my MSc. He said, MSc? I thought you were an MA, because in academia, you can't be both. You either go down one track or the other. You're an arts guy or you're a science guy. And quick as a flash, I said to this guy, yeah, I'm a whole brain man. And I thought, oh, that's a good line. What a good line. And straight away I could kind of, there's a book, Thoughts of a Whole Brain Man, or an album. But looking at astrology just from the perspective of data won't tell us much, really. Looking at astrology just from the perspective of mythology without data also won't really kind of get us very far. We need both things. And since we're dual hemispheric creatures, it makes sense to kind of look at life, in fact, through both of those lenses. One of the books that I've got up there, it's a book called Develop Your Psychic Skills by Enid Hoffman. It's a fantastic little book from the 1980s. And I was at a bus stop in Bournemouth in about 1988 with this book under my arm halfway through it, or getting a bus on the way to work at the time. And this man in the queue kind of noticed this book under my arm. And he said, do you believe in that, do you? And I thought, we have this conversation just about to start, because I'm so used to it from people. And I said, yeah. And I said to him, you've got 2 halves to your brain, a left brain and a right brain. And he went, yeah, kind of not sure where this was going. And I said, so you know that the left brain does calculus and mathematics and data, and your right brain does thoughts and impressions and feelings. And he said, yeah. I said, well, where's the logic in only using half your brain? It just doesn't make sense to kind of go down one route and at the exclusion of the other. You know, it's like we have a conscious mind and we have an unconscious. And in order to be able to make headway in life, you really need both of them to be on the same side rather than pulling in opposite directions. And we can explore some of that around day 5 as well. So through mythos and logos, we'll look at astrology. And a birth chart is calculated by looking at how the cosmos appears from the place that we take our very first breath, from the actual time that we take our very first breath. And time is important. I often say that astrologers are hooked on time. Everything we do is looking at cycles and with how cycles repeat. Fast cycles, medium pace cycles, very, very, very slow cycles that seem to kind of flow through the history of mankind and our endeavours. So planets hardly move through the day, but the Earth spins rapidly on its axis. And one of the reasons for being so pedant, I guess, about the actual time of birth, the easiest way to explain is, has anyone here ever seen anybody repair a bicycle? Anyone? I can't hear you. I know you're there. I can see you, but I can't hear you. You are allowed to speak. It's okay because it makes it more interactive.
Is it okay for us to speak? Yes. Upside down it sits normally when they're being fixed.
Indeed, indeed. They have a bike upside down. And you know, when you've got a bicycle upside down, the back wheel doesn't move because it's attached to pedals and chains and things. But the front wheel freely revolves so long as it's all set up properly. And in the front wheel, there's a valve used for pumping up the tyre. And the valve is heavy compared to all the other parts of the wheel, so it always goes down to the bottom. And the valve is situated by 2 spokes on either side. And if you put your hand on the rim of the wheel, the valve will go up in the air. And you can do that with it. Right. Now, when the valve goes up in the air, it's still situated relatively in the same place between the 2 spokes, but now it looks like it's in a different position to our eye, to the observer's eye. So if you think that there are 24 hours in a day, and there are 12 signs of the zodiac, that means that a different sign of the zodiac will rise over the horizon once every 2 hours. Every sign of the zodiac is the same size. They're all 30 degrees. So 12 times 30 gives you 360, and there's a circle. Or a circle of 360 degrees divided by 12 gives you 12 lots of 30. So that means that it takes about 2 hours for 30 degrees to rise up over the horizon, which roughly makes it about 2.5 minutes per degree. So now, that means that if there are 2 twins, say, they're born, 10 minutes apart? There could be 5 degrees of difference in the degree of zodiac that's on the horizon. And what we do in astrology is we pay particular attention to that rising point. We're going to be talking about that a lot at the end of the class today, right? And we look at the angular calculations from the other planets to that part of a chart. So 5 degrees difference could mean that one angle is present, and then 5 minutes later it's not there anymore. That's a difference in meaning. That's a difference in assessment of character. Completely different. No 2 people can be born at the same time in the same place exactly. You might be born in the same place, but not at the same time. You might be born at the same time, but in a different place. So an astrological birth chart is as unique as your fingerprints. Some people even think of it as like a celestial DNA, and that reading a birth chart is like reading the genome of a soul's incarnation. And it can seem like that. Right? Now, one thing is that our language isn't very, very good, meaning us native speakers of English, we do kind of compress language, or to use an Americanism from NLP, we generalize delete and distort things. So, for example, um, uh, some of you, if you were around a friend's house and a friend said to you, "Oh, could you pass that blue book?" Your eye would scan the room, you'd see a book that's blue, you'd pass it to your friend. But what you've actually given your friend isn't a blue book. You see, when you look at a book that's blue, what's happening is that the surface of the book absorbs all the colours of the light spectrum except for blue. Blue is the portion of the light spectrum that's reflected from its surface, and that's why we register it as a blue object. So in actual fact, technically, it's a non-blue book. But that would be weird, wouldn't it? If you went round a friend's house and said, "Oh, I do like your non-green jumper." Well, we don't talk like that. You know, some of you might say that you've seen a sunset or a sunrise. But of course, you've never seen a sunset. And you've never seen a sunrise. Because the sun doesn't set or rise. It stays still, and we go round it. You know, what you really witness is a turning to the east. But that would be strange, wouldn't it? If you kind of wrote on Facebook, "Oh, I saw a lovely turning to the east today." People would go, "What? What are you on about?" I actually do write that sometimes, by the way. And all my astrology students stroke their chins and go, "Oh, yes," knowingly. And all these other people are going, "What? What does that mean?" Yes, but that's the reality of things. So sometimes how we describe things isn't necessarily how it is. So we have to unpack the language of some of the things so that we can get to what we're really kind of discussing and talking about. When we look at the breadth of astrology, as you'll know from some of the emails and things, I do apologise for the quantity of those, by the way. There will be a few more handouts. I think there are 5 sets of handouts all in all. The one on signs of the zodiac is 50 pages. So, and the reason for giving you so much information is that I like the idea of, if a person does a course, that you pay for the course, and the course provides you with the information. Rather than you pay for a course, you get a little bit of information and a massive book list, and then you've got to invest loads and loads of money in books because the people who run the course couldn't give you the information. So I've done a lot of the legwork for you. And some people do this introduction course and they don't get any books at all. But if there was one that you're going to get, if someone says to me, "All right, if I've got a bit of a tight budget and I want to kind of look into this a bit more, but I can only really afford one book," what's that one book going to be? And that would be called The 12 Houses by Howard Sportus. The 12 Houses by Howard Sportus describes parts of an astrological chart, which we're going to look at in a minute, with an incredibly clear and broad approach. He describes different psychological concepts, but without necessarily saying that that's what he's doing. And what you find as you read the astrology in the 12 houses is that you're actually looking into about half a dozen different psychological approaches, from Freud, Jung, Asigoli, etc., Maslow. It's an astonishing piece of work. It has lots of layers of meaning built within it, and it's very, very clearly written. And I'd highly recommend it. Yes. So we're going to look at bits of psychology. We'll look at bits of psychology on day 5, I think it is. We'll look at some esoteric philosophy on day 4, and a little bit of that today, by the way. We have to do that. There will be discussions on past lives and the nature of life itself. We'll find ourselves looking at, what do we mean by the word life? What do we mean by the word death? If an astrological birth chart is calculated from the moment that we take our first breath, what does that mean? Are astrologers saying that life begins at first breath? And if they're saying that life begins at first breath, what does that mean about the abortion debate? That's very current in Texas at the moment, and in other parts of the world as well. People get murdered because of their opinions around this. I can't quite understand why someone who's pro-life would want to kill another person because they disagree with them. It doesn't really seem to be very pro-life to me. But then the way that some human beings live out their beliefs and values does seem contradictory to their beliefs and values sometimes. Uh, yes. But then there's a reason for all of that, and you can often find the reason in a chart. Oh, by the way, astrology is more than just charts, but that's the kind of most common usage of this ancient art. And you'll hear the phrase your chart. Oh, look at your chart. Oh, it's in your chart. We'll look at your chart, right? A lot. And of course, the birth chart isn't a chart of you at all. A birth chart is a map of symbols that describes the environment in which you were born. You're not actually represented in the chart. It's not a picture of you. It's a picture of the celestial sphere that's around you. And there'll be some other philosophical things you might find kind of interesting through this first part as well. You know, so we do have a kind of a lot of ground to cover through all of this. Did anybody have a read of the Fate and Free Will piece that I sent out? Anyone?
I'm afraid not yet.
No?
Sorry.
I looked
Okay.
at it. It was pretty interesting. I was like, oh, I got to the 10th page and I was pretty engrossed, but I also thought, oh, good. I'm glad it's only 10 pages because this is just the beginning.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a chapter from one of my books,
Yeah.
The Heart of Life.
I'm gonna say, I think I've read it in your book recently. I didn't read the email, but the book, yeah.
Yeah, indeed. So I'll let you discover that for yourselves. Right? We're going to have a love and a little word on fate and free will next time as well. But it's important. We do need to discuss it because if astrology is a thing of fate and destiny, then what we're doing here is pointless. Because if you can't change anything, what's the point of looking? You may as well just get up in the morning and eat your food and, you know, tend your garden and go to sleep at the end of it. However, if on the other hand, we have existential free will and you can be and do anything you want, no matter where you're born, no matter what your social status, no matter what your health condition, your DNA potentials, your epigenetics, no matter any of that, no matter your height, your width, no matter any of all of that, you can be and do anything. If that's the case, then astrology becomes a straitjacket, limiting our possibilities. So somewhere in between existential freedom and a kind of a fate where your life has been written like you're a puppet living out a script that's been written by some sadistic god who likes watching soap operas, right? It does seem like that sometimes. Where is this astrology thing? You know, one of the documents you would have got in an email is a listing of the kind of topics that I tell when I do a full life reading. For me, a full life reading, I call it an astrobiography. We'll chat about that more on day 11. But if someone said, can you please tell me everything that I can see in a birth chart? I go, okay. And it would take about 90 hours for me to kind of run out of things to say. That's a lot. And because there's so much information in one of these things. Not everybody has an astrobiography, by the way. They're like a Rolls Royce of readings. Most people kind of potter about in a like a BMW, I guess, or whatever, Skoda. But yes, so because astrology holds such amount of information in it, being able to kind of describe that to a person in a way that's clear and easy to digest and makes sense in itself is an art as well. Because there are three things taking place when you read astrology. There's the chart, there's the person, and there's the brain of the astrologer that's the mediator between those two. There are some people who are brilliant at reading charts, but their communication skills are terrible. There are other people who've got brilliant communication skills, but they're not really good at reading charts, but they sound like they know a lot. Right? So really, again, as an astrologer, you need to have a comprehension of astrology, but also a way to be able to convey it. There isn't time in this introduction course to teach you all of the art of that. that's more something that we'd look at in the professional training that this opens up to if you want to go further. Or, by the way, we better mention a couple of things, a bit of housekeeping. Some of you are only here just to do the free 7 classes at the beginning, and that's absolutely fine. It's a gift for you. You know, we're going to cover a lot of ground in the first 7 classes, and it's a wonderful thing to be able to share that with souls who, for whatever reason, aren't able, or maybe perhaps don't want to, kind of continue and kind of delve further into this. And I hope that you find some of the things in these opening classes to be thought-provoking and illuminating. Others are continuing and doing the whole of this introduction course. By the time we get to class 12, that's when we begin to look at our own charts as well. And you'll find that it's a fascinating art that can describe a variety of different dynamics of your life. Essentially, a stranger telling you stuff about yourself just by looking at kind of wiggles and squiggles. It's a bit of a cool thing to do. For those that do the professional training that want to go on further, you kind of realize then that the whole of this introduction course is just paddling in the shallows, and there's an ocean to delve into. Right? But we have a long chat about that at the end of this. Right? By this, I don't mean today. I mean at the end of the introduction course. So, yes, a lot of things that we need to kind of look through. That article on fate and free will, I expanded on that when I did my MSc. I used that as the core of my dissertation, and my MSc papers have been published in a book called How We Come Into Being. If any of you want to have a look at that, let me know. You can get it on Amazon, but it's much better if you get it from me because you get it signed, and that's always a bit more special, isn't it? So now, most of us here are relative strangers. I've had some conversations with some of you, and others of you are new to me. So I have no idea what you personally believe. I haven't a clue. I don't know if any of you believe in the concept of soul. I don't know whether or not you've got a kind of a spiritual dynamic to your life or not. I don't know if you believe in a sense of continuum of the soul. But there are parts of a birth chart that touch on these subjects, so we will explore these things in this introduction. So a birth chart can reveal, like I said, all sorts of things about you, but there are some things that it can't tell you. I mean, one thing is that a birth chart can't tell you if you're male or female. You know, if you're a boy or a girl. Now, that's quite fundamental to our sense of self. It's quite fundamental to our sense of identity when you think about it, right? But you can't tell by looking at the symbols in a chart about the person's kind of medical condition or their gender. You can get an idea of anatomy, you can get an idea of illnesses and diseases that a person might have, but you still need to discuss with the person exactly what's happening so that you can corroborate the correlation between the two. Okay, now I use the word correlation there. There's a reason for that. You'll find, as we progress forwards, I think around class number 3, that in the history of astrology, there have been changes in the philosophy that surrounds it. Some of you might know that the word science comes from the Latin scientia, which means knowledge. Sure you know that. Yes, of course you do. Right. And the word philosophy is comprised of 2 Greek words fused together. So philo means love, and Sophia was the goddess of wisdom. So philosophia means the love of wisdom. It's nice, isn't it? Now, in antiquity, philosophy was considered of more value and virtue than knowledge. Have any of you heard of a book called The Master and His Emissary? Oh, check it out. It's fantastic. Oh, by the way, I've got quite an extensive library, and I do refer to books and things, right? But The Master and His Emissary is written by a guy called Ian McGilchrist, and it came out around, around 2010. that kind of time. And it's about the binodal brain. So it's a book about the left and right brain. Right? And the book itself is split in half. So part one looks at the neuroscience of left and right hemisphere. Right? Part two is a review of Western thought, starting from academia right up to Freud. And it looks at this review of Western thought specifically through the right and left brain, hence the master and his emissary. So you can think of the approach to life and the universe and the world in antiquity as being mainly mythos, mainly of right brain, mainly of philosophia. And there was a transition, there was a turning point, which we'll discuss in day 3, around the 15th, 16th centuries, when scientia, the left brain, began to have the ascendancy. I know a lot of people from the New Age and the spiritual communities who find in their world that this reliance on scientia that we have in our society seems to somehow be detrimental, and that they prefer things to be of a philosophy nature. But because of looking at the philosophies of things, it does mean that sometimes we look at the philosophy within astrology itself. So in a nutshell, there was a guy called Plato, right? And around Plato's time in the academy, what would happen is that you would go to the forum and you would declare your opinion of the world. So if you ever see Monty Python's Life of Brian and the people on the soapboxes in the market, it's exactly that, right? So someone saying, I think we're all lemons, right? And people would stand and listen to the person telling you you're all lemons, right? And if you didn't like what he was saying, you'd go off and stand near another box. And so ideas weren't considered to be facts and truths. Ideas were considered to be of merit from their popularity. It was the popularity of things rather than the facts of things. Right? It's quite an important thing to kind of get your head around if you're looking at antiquity. So Plato went along with the idea that there's a geocentric universe, meaning that the Earth is the center of the universe and everything else revolves around the Earth. Right? And he also went with this idea that planets represent ambassadors of the divine, and that these planets have influence. You might hear astrologers use the word influence, and they talk about energy, right? The energy is today, the influence is today. And the inference of this is that coming from these planets, there's some kind of magic ray beam, right? Now, if you look at this picture of the solar system, and maybe let your eye go right out here to, say, Neptune, right out here. Look at the distance between the Earth and the Moon, and then look at the distance between Neptune and where we are. If you put a radio mast on top of Neptune and began to broadcast it when Neptune was at, say, 10 degrees of Aries, by the time that radio mast has gone across the millions of miles in space to actually reach planet Earth and stimulate the speakers of your radio, Neptune wouldn't be at 10 degrees of Aries anymore. It would be in a different sign altogether, because that would take a very long time for that radio signal to reach us. So in terms of there being energies or influence, how can that happen? Right? But he had a pupil called Aristotle, and Aristotle went with Plato's ideas. Aristotle had a pupil called Alexander, and Alexander became the Great. And he invaded, as you know, the entire known world at the time. That means they went into India, into the Middle East, into China, the whole of Europe. That's a lot, right, of dominion. And where an army goes, it takes its philosophies with it. So these ideas were seeded into different places around the world. We'll have a chat about all of that again a bit more on day 16. But still, uh, in ancient Egypt, uh, once the Greeks had arrived, they built a library in a place called Alexandria, and it was known as the Great Library of Alexandria. Anyone ever heard of the Great Library of Alexandria? Yeah, Patty has. Cool. Excellent. A couple of you have. Just think, for those that haven't heard of it, there was this massive library in a place called Alexandria. Now, when you think of a library, you might think of your local kind of public utility library, with a couple of floors and some books and a children's section. This thing had like 7 spas and 9 floors. Right? It had every document in the world in one place. Literally, the eggs in one basket. And of course, all of this stuff was pre-Christian, so therefore it's all pagan. And the first Roman emperor to convert to Christianity was Emperor Constantine, and he didn't like all these pagan writings being on the other side of the Mediterranean. So he called his sergeant at the time, whose name was Julius Caesar, and sent him with some troops to dispatch them to Alexandria to burn the thing down, which they did. And as it was burning, some manuscripts were rescued. And the last curator of the Great Library of Alexandria was a guy called Claudius Ptolemy, and he was around in about 100 AD, and he wrote books like Almagest and Tetrabiblos, and these manuscripts went into the Islamic world, because that's where they were rescued into. And Islamic scholars began to kind of add and develop these ideas until their own priesthood decided that they were kind of going away from the Quran too much, and they started to be persecuted by their own clergy, as it were. And then the information then kind of followed the Crusade routes back into Europe, and that kick-started the Renaissance. So that gives you a bit of an idea of the timeline of thought. So it wasn't until Neoplatonism began to kind of emerge around the 16th century that a different philosophy began to be known. Now, Ptolemy's writing kind of set the template for astrology. For about 1500 years, his ideas were it, right? And obviously, a good scholar in the medieval period, a good scholar in the Elizabethan period, would, read the texts, and you read the books that have been written before. And of course, they're all reading Ptolemaic stuff, not realizing what they're following is Aristotelian philosophy. So this new idea began to emerge from the Stoics. In ancient Greece, there were people called the Stoics, and they had a completely different idea. Their idea was that astrology isn't a matter of influence or causality, but it's something of correlation. So a modern idea might be, for example, if you were driving through an unfamiliar city and you have either a map on the passenger seat or a sat-nav, right? The sat-nav guides you around the city. But the sat-nav doesn't create the city. The sat-nav doesn't build the buildings. They're there already by the great planners, whoever they happen to be. All the sat-nav does is correlate with the environment that you're moving through. But you are still the agency. You choose if you're going to stop or go. You choose if you're going to follow the navigation map or not. You can go left, you can go right, you can go back, you can go forwards. Right? The sat-nav isn't the agency. You are. So the sat-nav correlates with the world, but it doesn't cause the world to come into being. Does that make sense? So for me, astrology is an art of correlation. It is not a matter of influence or causality. So our lives aren't dominated by planets. But this art does describe the dynamics of our lives very well indeed when it's read competently. And I'm going to show you more and more and more about all that as we go forwards. So straight away, what we just said here would contradict with a lot of the stuff you find on the internet, because people use language like energies, influence, rays all the time. And one of the reasons for that is that, like in pop music, if there was going to be a concert by the latest pop star, they could probably sell out Wembley Stadium 3 nights running. but a local classical orchestra can only fill out, a small theatre or a chapel maybe one night. And so, like in all topics, very few people like to go to the high end. Most people go into the kind of the populist end. This island gave birth to William Shakespeare, and the most popular document on this island is the Daily Mail and the Sun, which just says something about the nature of populism and population, right? So for some people, what we could describe as Beethoven end astrology is too complex for them to get their head around. So they need simplicity. And so, yes, but just to let you know, people who've kind of studied the MA in cultural astronomy and astrology, and that started in 2002, so it has its 20th birthday next year. All the people that have gone through that have heard about these ideas. And so you find that there's a kind of a different level of discourse depending on how an astrologer has got their information and knowledge. Just so that you can put some things in perspective, so that when you encounter things online, you've already got like the ability to kind of discern who's worthy of your time and who isn't. Right? Because there are so many different opinions in this astrological community, that it's very easy to be informed, and it's even easier to be misinformed. Okay, hence we're going to talk about the books next time, so that you've got some bona fide good places to kind of start exploring. So with one of these charts, we can tell all sorts of things. It's actually possible to describe your birth experience itself and the psychological impact of that. It's possible to describe the first 3 years of your life and the scripting or unconscious conditioning that you receive. Because you hang around with these two guide people, generally. Maybe one of them. It's certainly sometimes both of them. And these people are examples of how to be a successful human, because they're alive, right? So, if you're a little girl and your mum is like this giant who's 8 times your size, right? And from a Darwinian perspective, if you're hanging around with a giant who's 8 times your size, hello, right? What are you doing? Right? Because whatever she's doing works. Doesn't matter if she's enjoying it or not. From a Darwinian perspective, it works. Is she metabolizing? Yes. Is she breathing in and out? Yes. That means she's successful. And if I want to be 8 times my size and be that successful, then I've got to do what she does. So in an astrological chart, we can tell not what your mum's like per se. You'd have to look at your mum's whole chart to see that, right? But you can get the idea of how you perceived her as a baby and what kind of things you imbued from her in your developing formative years between 0 and 3 years old. It's possible to look at a birth chart and get an idea of your experience of the language that you heard around you. And by that, I don't mean necessarily the dialect, but whether or not the language around you was the language of enthusiasm, or whether or not there was the language of critique. Was there the language of encouragement? Was there the language of discouragement? Was there an atmosphere of peace? Was there an atmosphere of discord or even aggression? Because in the period of time when we're developing language as our cognitive faculties begin to kind of arise, the language that we hear around us informs our brain of the lexicon of our vocabulary. And those phrases, those figures of speech, become the default phrases and figures of speech that we use to express ourselves in the playground. But that also means they're the default pathways of thinking when we talk to ourselves as well. This means they're also the kind of default pathways of hearing when we hear another person. So if someone grows up in an environment of praise, right, and someone says to them, praise, 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 criticism, praise, 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 they'll just hear, the praise. But if someone grows up in an atmosphere of criticism, they'll hear criticism, 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 praise, criticism, criticism, And all they get is just like the criticism. They can't hear the praise because it's lost in the noise of all the critique. And so that person can be the person who ends up kind of working in, I don't know, some kind of research and development or accounts, or in some kind of hygiene department, because their brain is wired to fault find. Yes. Oh, the joy of being in a relationship with someone whose brain does that. Yes, I've written you a love note. Yes, thank you for telling me about the grammatical errors, but I've still written you a love note. Sometimes, if someone gives you a rose, right, and you take the petals off it to find out what it is, all you're left with is a stalk with thorns. So analysis has its place, but so does enthusiasm, and so does optimism, and sometimes those things are misplaced, right? So we can use this language to look at a person's life through our teens, our 20s, our 30s, our 40s, our 50s. You can use this language to describe how someone does their washing up, the kind of dreams you have, your relationship with God, everything, apart from the fact if you're a boy or a girl, and a few other things. But the stuff that astrology can describe, when you use it well, is an incredible tool. There's one part of a birth chart that describes the kind of experiences a person has when they go do meditation. So that means that if you run some kind of meditation group, or if you do client work that involves any kind of form of relaxation or hypnotherapy, you can look at the astrological birth chart of a client prior to doing the session, and you can know exactly what kind of thing they're going to experience when you begin to ask them to close their eyes and relax. It's very, very useful, And that might sound far-fetched, but it's on record that Carl Jung, when he was still Freud's pupil, wrote to Freud and said that he described astrology as the sum total of psychological knowledge of antiquity. And in another letter, he wrote that he looks at the astrological birth chart of every new client before starting the first session. And those are quotes, verbatim quotes. So seems to be good enough for Carl Jung. In fact, when you look at Jung's psychological models, you realize how much they're based on astrology, the modeling of the structure of astrology. So I think let's look at something new. An astrological birth chart. Right, this is mine. Now, if you look at this, and this is the first time you've seen a birth chart, and it looks like a cacophony of wiggles and squiggles, that's because it is a cacophony of wiggles and squiggles. Right? But all of these wiggles and squiggles have meaning. And this image that you can see in this rectangle can be looked at in two parts. There's a round thing, and there's a triangular thing as well. Oops, hold on. Yes, there's a triangle thing. Right. But we'll start kind of by looking at the round thing. But just before we do that, is there anyone here that's looked at an astrological birth chart before today?
When we did my reading.
Okay, let me rephrase that. Is there anyone here who's looked at an astrological birth chart with anyone other than me? Or a chart that's been generated?
Once, but not really understood it fully, other than the way it was described, but didn't understand the chart.
No, but I want to talk about the look of it, the art of it. So if you look at birth charts online, has anyone done that? Looked at birth charts online? No?
Not really.
Okay.
No.
But if you ever do, you'll find that most of them are black letterings, characters, on a white background. That seems to be the most common thing. So all the characters in an astrological chart are usually just the plain colour. Now, I'm dyslexic. In fact, I have 3 autistic conditions. I have Asperger's syndrome, dyslexia and dyspraxia, and an undiagnosed 4th, which is called echopraxia, which is very peculiar. I'll explain that at some stage, I'm sure. But to make it easier for my brain, I've made everything color-coded. And this makes it easier for your eye to find certain things. If you're looking for, say, for example, Saturn, if it's color-coded, you can very quickly find it. someone there had a PC thing and I used to print off charts, people. Yes, there, cool. So it's part of the chat thing. I've got it open so I can just keep up with what people are saying. Yes, so there's another reason for color coding things. Now, my background is chiefly pagan. Just to give you a brief summary, I was a very confused child. I was an undiagnosed autistic person, and my twin brother died when we were 4 days old, and when I was 10, my mum became disabled, and she had a series of heart attacks and strokes and died 9 years later, or about 10 years later, when I was 19. And at the beginning of that, I experienced something which completely freaked me out. I saw for the first time footage of the liberation of Belsen on one of these kind of documentary things, And not only was I horrified by what I was seeing, but I was also horrified by the fact that this was a civilized country. And my brain went, if that's a civilized country, and they've done that, where do I live? I live in a civilized country. Oh, we could do that. And then I wanted to know, how does that happen? Why does that happen? What are the signs for it happening? What do I need to watch for in case it happens again? And I was 10, thinking like that. And around that time, I was beginning to kind of listen to music a bit more seriously. And someone lent me an album called Hunky Dory by this man called David Bowie. But they didn't explain to me that he'd been reading a lot of stuff about Tibet and China and was studying Buddhism and was that far away from having his head shaved and becoming a monk full blown. Right? So a lot of the lyrics of Hunky Dory are actually embedded with Buddhist theology. If you look at the lyrics of a song called Changes, the impermanent stream. Right? And there's a song on there called Quicksand. And this song references the Golden Dawn, it references Aleister Crowley, and the Bardo, which is the Buddhist idea of the space between lives. So I said to my dad, who was very busy kind of trying to care for my mum at the time, what's a Bardo? And he said, I don't know, right? I'm busy. So as I'd been taught to do, I went off to my local library and kind of tried to look over the counter up at this woman and said, have you got any books in the Bardo? And I came out that library as a 10-year-old with Aleister Crowley on one hand and a book on Tibetan Buddhism. And I started reading that stuff then. I thought I should understand politics when I was 12. So I got The Rise and Fall of the Third Reich and the abridged works of Karl Marx so that I'd have the polarity of the extremes. And I read them side by side. I picked up Freud when I was 13. I dismissed it when I was 13 and a half. Because I thought there was some things that he'd missed, looking at the basement of humanity all the time and forgetting about the penthouse, really. So from about 13 and a half until I was kind of 17, I was hungry for information and I was searching and searching, looking at all sorts of things. And I bumped into numerology when I was 17, and there seemed to be something in this Pythagorean idea about vibration that I really liked, and resonance. And that led me into kind of beginning to look at astrology. And by the time I was 20, my family had broken up. My mum had died, and my dad had abandoned me. And I was very, very lucky to encounter some people who were into witchcraft, paganism, of a kind of a kindly disposition. And their way of doing things involved a great deal of study. And I spent most of my 20s studying a lot of different philosophies and religions and things, and leaping over bonfires occasionally in the woods. But one of the first things that I was asked to look at was a thing called candle magic. That doesn't mean that you magic up candles. That's not what it means, right? If you wanted to, if there was someone who was ill, and you wanted to send some healing to them, right? And you were going to imagine the healing you're sending as some kind of beam of light. What color would you choose to send healing? What would be the color of healing for you? What's the color of life in this world?
Green, yellow.
Green. Yeah, everything that's growing, everything that's good for us is green. Right? Because if you think about it, plants are just the physical embodiment of sunshine, aren't they? Through their photosynthesis. Every time you eat something that's green, you're eating starlight. I don't know if you ever think of it like that, but that's what you're doing. You know, are you aware that you live in starlight? No? You know, the sun is a star, right? And you spend your whole life walking around in and breathing in and absorbing starlight. And when the sun sets, or rather when we turn to the east and the light from the sun becomes obscured from our eye, you can see the other stars above you as well. Our lives, all the things we do, all the things we create and grow and leave and, want to kind of encourage and discourage, everything we do is all done in starlight. When you think about the reality of where we are, it's wonderful, isn't it? But anyway, yes, I would agree as well that green, but then what green? Spring green, deep forest green, you've got different shades of green. So I duly went into this kind of local little kind of bookshop at the time, this kind of little pagan shop. And they had some books on candle magic, and one book said that red was vitality. I thought, Another one said that red was danger. I thought, Another one that said red was aggression. I thought, Another one said that red was energy. I thought, so which is it? So I spent a bit of time thinking about the nature of colours and resonance, and I'd all been thinking about numerology anyway. So when I started to kind of hand draw birth charts, because I'm one of the generation that used to do astrology by hand, with a calculator and some books and tables, and I got to a point where I could calculate a birth chart in about an hour and a half and draw it as well. But when I started to draw them, you could use like a blue biro and maybe a black biro for drawing the lines and maybe a red biro for some other bits. But it's very hard for a dyslexic person to see the differences between things. So in 1991, when I got hold of my first ever Astro software, I decided that I wanted the birth chart to kind of look like the sky in a sense. So that's why I use a black background, because when I go outside and I look up at the stars, it's not a white background, it's black. Right? And it does something to my brain. I notice that there's a difference in how we think between evening and morning. Any of you ever have some of those really beautiful philosophical conversations that only seem to take place around 1 a.m? You know those things? Yeah? The mind seems to open into a new space when the world is quiet and the clatter of life seems to fade. So I like a birth chart to kind of remind my brain that it's nighttime, because that opens up the channeling of my right brain. Right? And it's very good for your intuition, rather than a glary, kind of like looking at the sun at midday on a white background. So what I've done in this thing is, in the signs of the zodiac around the outside, I've made them the colour of what they represent. Right? So, for example, the fire signs are red. The earth signs are green. The air signs are yellow to represent invisibility. The water signs are blue. So that makes it very easy to remember which sign of the zodiac is what element for a star. When it comes to the planets, I've done the same thing with them, but a bit more discreetly. So the sun is orange to represent like a sunset or a sunrise. The moon is blue, obviously. Mercury, a thing of intellect, largely. So I've made Mercury yellow to represent the invisibility of thought, if you like. Venus, the planet of love, is pink, because in a sense you could say that love is a fusion of energy mixed in with the purity of divinity. So when you get that, then you get love, hence pink. Energy itself, Mr. Mars, is red. Jupiter, the planet that correlates with philosophy, codified systems of thought and religion, is purple. Saturn, some people dislike Saturn. In my early days, I used to make him grey, because most people experience Saturn as some kind of celestial Eeyore. But essentially, Saturn was an earth god in its early days, and the lessons of life, which are hard and hurt, are things of the earth. This is Earth School. Right? An Earth School is nice sometimes, and Earth School is bloody horrible at other times. And all of those things are hard, and we learn from them, we grow from them. Hence, Saturn is dark, deep forest green. Uranus is also another planet of great intellect and enlightenment, hence it's yellow again. Neptune, god of the sea, is a slightly different blue. Pluto, the furthest distant planet that we look at in astrology, is the palest blue of all. The north node of the moon is a similar colour to the moon itself, and Chiron is another planet of deep healing and the part of fortune of joy, and they're very slightly different in their green shadings, but it makes it easier to find them. Now, these lines in the middle, we call these aspects. We're going to chat about what these are in a minute. And what I've done as well is that because the aspects correlate with planets, so there's an actual relationship between some of the angles that we look at in a birth chart and the nature of planets themselves. So, for example, Saturn is a deep green. Squares are Saturnian in nature, so therefore the squares are also the same colour as Saturn. So the whole thing becomes colour-coded, see? And what I wanted to get to when I started doing this was to make an astrological birth chart look like a mandala. So that you don't, even if you don't know the meanings of the symbols, the feel of it will speak to you. And we're going to look at a selection of birth charts in a moment, so you can see what kind of feel you get from them, even if you can't read it. Right? And the idea of it being a language that speaks not just to your left brain, but speaks to your right brain as well. Okay? How are you finding this so far?
Fascinating.
Yeah?
Good.
Good.
Yeah.
Because there's a lot more. Yes. Now, the easiest way to make sense of an astrological birth chart is to see it as a series of circles inside circles inside circles. So around the outside, we have all 12 signs of the zodiac. Right? Everyone has all 12 signs of the zodiac in their chart. I know that might confuse you. That might astonish you. For some people, that's worrying. Someone said to me once, don't tell me I've got Pisces in me. I don't want any Pisces in me. I don't like Pisces. I thought, oh, you don't like music? Okay. So, now, some of you might think of yourselves as a Pisces or a Taurus or a Gemini or a Leo or a Virgo or something like that, right? And there's a very high chance that the reason you describe yourself with that single word is because someone told you that's what you are. Or you might have read, you are a Leo. And you might say to people, I am a Leo. The only thing is, you're not. Right? There isn't one human being on this planet that's an Aquarius or a Libra, because they don't exist. I know. If you go to the Natural History Museum and you look at the annals of zoology and genealogy, you won't find any reference to a creature called a Gemini or an Aquarius, because they're not there. Right? But that phrase, you are a, or I am a, is an identity statement. Now, something weird has happened in astrology that, if it happened in a different discipline, would be very peculiar indeed. Right? Like, let's use anatomy and physiology as an example. Right? So imagine an anatomist comes up to you and says, hi. You go, hi. And they say, you have a shoulder. You go, yeah. And you have a kidney. Right, yes, I have a kidney, yes. And you have a big toe. Yes. And they go, well, you're a big toe. You go, what? And they go, you're a big toe. You go, what does that mean? They say, oh, it means you shuffle through life. And then you accept it. You go, oh, okay. And then you go up to people and describe yourself in the same way. You say, hello, I'm a big toe. And they go, I'm a shoulder. And you go, Well, what does that mean? They go, I carry responsibility. They go, oh, I shuffle through life. No way would you accept someone trying to describe the sophistication and beauty of your anatomy and physiology by isolating one small part of it and saying that one small part represents you as a totality, right? That would be mental. But that's exactly what's happened in astrology. In astrology, at the Beethoven end, we look at the whole chart, not a tiny part of it, right? So you will find that this extends beyond the mere idea that there are only 12 kinds of people. In professional astrology, we have the idea that there are 7.7 currently billion human beings, each one unique with its own particular lensing and model of reality. And essentially, the task of astrology is to be able to describe the life experience of any human being that could ever live from the dawn of mankind until when mankind finishes. No matter who they are, no matter what their context, no matter what their epoch of history, no matter what their economic circumstance, no matter what their gender. That's a big ask, right? It's much, much more than remembering 12 things. We will explore these signs in depth, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to teach you how to read, right? So that when you look at an astrological birth chart, you don't have to look things up. I want it so that you can read it as easily as you read English text. Okay? This is a language. So I'm going to teach you the language of it. Right? And if you're thinking already, I'm never going to remember this, it's okay. You don't have to. Those of you that are doing the full course, get copies of the videos. This is being recorded. Right? Now, there are some of you that aren't going to do the full course, and for you, this is an incredibly interesting TV show, and just absorb it like that. Right? That's the best way. Now, I'm going to ask actually some of you for permission to do something. You see, we do have space for more people to join us. But one of the things that people don't know is what's it like? And it's hard to actually describe what this is like unless you've actually experienced it. So would it be all right with you guys if I made this first class available on YouTube so that you could share this with other people if you wanted to? Would that be okay?
I'm okay with that. Absolutely.
Yeah, fine.
Does anyone have a problem with that? No, good. All right. I just wanted to make sure. It's best to ask, for permissions and things. So these are the signs of the zodiac going around the outside. Now, these signs of the zodiac, by the way, aren't there. Yes, it's another one of these things. The zodiac is not there. Right? You've never heard in all the years of space flights and space shuttles and Apollo missions and, SpaceX and everything else that happens, you've never heard something like, well, Bob, we just had confirmation that the shuttle's going to launch at 3:15 local time, and it's going to make a big hole through Sagittarius at 4 o'clock. So we're really looking forward to that. Yeah, just confirmed it's on re-entry. It's going to smash a big hole through Taurus. The space rockets and the space junk don't make big holes in the zodiac because it isn't there. It doesn't exist. What actually does exist is this. I'm sure you're aware that with the Earth leaning on its axis, that as the Earth goes around the Sun, because it's on a 43-degree tilt, that this means that at certain times of the year, one hemisphere is being very clearly illuminated and the other hemisphere is in shadow. Then as the Sun moves around, the area of the portion of the Earth that is closest to the Sun gets the heat, while the other side of the Earth doesn't. And we call these seasons. Yep, sure you're all aware of that, aren't you? Yes, good. Sorry, it's not going to get too technical, right? Just a smidge, right? So, now, if you think of, there's one time a year when we have our longest day. I think I'm right in saying that everyone here is in the northern hemisphere of Earth. Is that right? Yeah, from America. Dear, are you in northern? You're in northern hemisphere, aren't you?
Yes, I am.
Yeah, good. I just wanted to. It's always right to check, So we're all in the Northern Hemisphere. That means that when it's around, the 21st of July, we have our longest day. And then the daylight begins to recede. And then when we get to around the 21st of December, we have our shortest day of the year. And there's a very big difference between those two things. But there are intermediaries. There's a time of year when the hours of daylight are equal to the hours of light time. In fact, it happens twice. Right? But although they're exactly the same in terms of daylight hours, they feel completely different. At one time, when the hours of daylight are exactly equal to the hours of night, everything is sort of green and bushy, right? And it's still a bit cold from the winter. At the other time of year, when the hours of daylight and nighttime are balanced, it's warmer, because we've still got the heat of the summer, but everything's kind of orange and in a state of decay. And if you think of each of these seasons having like a beginning and a middle where it's established, and then an end point where, it's like around kind of May, June time, you're not quite sure, is it too cold to leave your coat behind, or is it too hot to take your coat with you? And you're not quite sure where you are. So there's this kind of intermediary before you go into the next season. So in a sense, then, we can divide these seasons into 12. And these 12 qualities of experience are the relationship between the earth and the sun as we experience it. There is a zodiac, just to confuse you, there is a zodiac that is the star constellations. But the zodiac that we use in astrology, horoscopic astrology, is called the tropical zodiac, and it's divisions of the ecliptic. Now, the ecliptic, we know, of course, that we're going around the sun, but it looks to us subjectively as if the sun goes around us. Right? And that apparent path of the sun is called the ecliptic. So what we do is we look at these qualities of the ecliptic, and that gives us our sense of zodiac. Okay? Rather than using words to describe these qualities, we use these symbols, and the word zodiac means a circle of animals. And I know that some of them aren't animals, like scales isn't an animal. Yes, but this representation of our experience between the earth and the sun using the celestial sphere began in Babylon. And it was the Babylonians that came up with this idea. The Greeks invaded Babylon, picked it up from there. The Romans invaded Greece, they picked it up from there. Romans came over here, we started doing stuff to it. Some of us went over to America, they've done stuff to it. Right? So this language kind of grows and evolves as it kind of passes from one culture to another and kind of goes around. Right. Now, so we have our things here. Now, another thing we have then, of course, are the planets. Right? So here's the Earth in the center. So the center of the birth chart is where the Earth would be. All right? And we need there to be a planet. So let's look at, there's the sun on the outside of it. So you can see that when we look at a birth chart, essentially the planets are outside because they're beyond the pathway of the ecliptic. But to make it easy for us to pay particular attention to what we're doing, when we draw it, we draw the symbol inside the wheel rather than outside. Okay, it makes it tidy. We know, of course, that these things to scale, if you drew the sun to scale in a birth chart, it would literally be about half a mile away if you were drawing it this size on a piece of paper. So rather than doing that, we just kind of, because it's a symbolic representation rather than a literal map, we put the symbol inside the chart. Okay? All right. So these are the planets. And for an astrologer, planets represent behaviors, things that we do. We add, we create, we minus things, we destroy, we go towards things, we back away from things. All the behaviors that human beings do are represented by these symbols. And all of these symbols have multiple layers of meaning. Okay? So, for an astrologer then, a planet in a sign of the zodiac. So a planet represents something that we do and the sign of the zodiac represents the manner or style in which we do that thing. Now, you'll notice in this diagram that the planets aren't just there on their own. When we looked at it, there's a planet. Now, that's nice and clear. But, oh, why are these things here? Now, the reason is, I'll use this little portion here, right down here at the bottom. This purple, what looks like a purple number 4, or Jupiter. Right? When I was born, Jupiter was at 1 degree of Pisces. But if I remove those configurations, now this symbol is big. You see, the planets really, if they were drawn to scale, would be a dot. There would be no bigger than 1 degree of the wheel. But we wouldn't be able to read that, just a load of dots. So the software makes the symbol big so that we can see it. But that means that the symbol now occupies more space than it actually really does occupy and take up. This Jupiter here is there, where the tip of my cursor is. But it actually looks like it goes all the way out to here. But it isn't, it's there. So what the software does, it puts next to the symbol the specific degree that it's at. To avoid confusion, if it's near a boundary line, it lets us know the sign of the zodiac that it's in. And then it also tells us the minutes as well, just in case we're doing any on-the-hoof calculations, which you're not going to be doing for a long, long time, right? Just in case any of you are slightly kind of dyscalculate, or you have problems with kind of mathematics, you don't have to worry about that. Geometry, yes. Calculations, no. We'll let the software do that for now. It's hard enough to read a birth chart, let alone kind of do all the maths part of it too. So I like it so that people learn how to read them first, and then if you want to do the maths, you can find out how to do it. So you get a symbol, which is a planet. It tells you the degree, the sign that it's in, and how many minutes there are as well. Okay? Now there are these other kind of objects in here. And that is these white lines. Now, these white lines are called houses. And the houses in a birth chart represent fields of life experience or contexts. We'll explore those in a great depth from class 12 right through to class number 17. Right? So the houses will get a lot of attention. And now the houses represent, if you like I said, the context of things. So where we're likely to do things. So a planet describes something that we do, the sign of the zodiac, the way we do that thing, and the house position, where that behavior is most likely to be observed. Okay? So there's stuff we do, how we do it, and where we do it. And once we start looking at that, we're starting to get an idea of how a individual is likely to do things and react to things, respond to things through their life in various contexts. Okay, now there's also these lines that were in the middle. We call these lines aspects. That's because aspect means to see, right? And these represent the angular relationships between the planets at the time we're born. Or in other words, they represent the relationships between parts of ourselves, between parts of our psyche. So, for example, if someone's conscious mind is in harmony with the person's unconscious, then that's the kind of person that says, right, I'm going to go to the gym 3 days a week. And they get there. But if someone's conscious mind is out of harmony, is discordant with their unconscious, that's the kind of person that says, right, I'm going to go to the gym 3 days a week, and then they sit on a sofa and eat cake. Right? So, yes. Now, these lines in the middle, I don't know what kind of size device you're looking at this on. I've got a 26-inch screen that I'm looking at. But even then, I can't see the gaps between these things. You'd have to draw this out on a warehouse-sized floor to see the gaps between these lines. They're all too compact together. So what we do is we represent these angular relationships with this triangle device that's in the corner of the screen. right? And you notice again that the symbols of the aspects are color-coded, which match the planets that they're associated with. So some of the orange ones represent the sun, or they correlate with the sun. The red ones correlate with Mars, etc. The purple ones correlate with Jupiter. So you can see that almost like, for example, there's one here between Neptune and Chiron, right? And there's a purple line between them, which kind of suggests that there's like a bridge that's made of Jupiter between Chiron and Neptune in my reality. Right? Whereas there's a bridge made of Saturn between Neptune and Saturn in my nature of reality. So these can give clues or aids to interpretation later. All right. Now, I know this might be a bit complex and things. I'm just introducing a language to you. It's going to be a bit mind-boggling to start with, right? So what we're going to do is we're going to have a quick look at some now, right? Just to get you to have like a feel for these. And then we'll begin to look at everything right from the very, 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 very beginning. But first, check these out. Oh, that's mine, by the way. You've already seen that. This is Bruce Lee. Everyone here know who Bruce Lee was?
Yep. Martial arts guy.
He was a kung fu master of such mastery. An astonishing human being. Just looking at the man, you could tell he has a sense of focus. So he's got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 objects, all compact into the sign of Scorpio, the sign of obsessive intensity. Right? And these 5 objects that are packed into Scorpio, the sign of obsessive intensity, are making a square or challenging angle to Pluto, the planet that rules Scorpio, in the 8th house, Scorpio's natural house. This guy was intense, like to the power of 10, right? And you just had to look at the man to see that. And so it looks as if his whole world is compact into a very tight space. And when you look at him, he looked like he was compact into a very tight space. You know, there wasn't anything about Bruce Lee that let you know that he'd have a lapsed day and go to a party, right? He just didn't look like he would have a relaxed day and go to a party, you know. And you can kind of, just looking at this, there's a sense of everything being tight and compressed. Do you get that kind of sense? Now, this next person has a similar patterning. It's not exactly the same. It's a bit more loose, but it's very similar. And this is Jimi Hendrix. So there's this same almost thing. There are these planets over here making these kind of challenging aspects, these planets over here, but they're a bit more sprinkled out. They're not quite as intense. I'm not suggesting, of course, that anyone with this kind of configuration dies young, but it just so happens that they were both masters of their craft and they didn't live long. The only way you could know if that's a common theme or not would be to do the birth chart of every single human being that's alive, every human being that's ever been alive, and do a comparative evaluation. And I haven't been alive long enough to be able to even begin to do that process, so I don't know how common it is, right? And if anyone ever says, oh, this is a common theme, how could they possibly know that without looking at everyone's birth chart? So be careful of generalized language. This next one's a bit more kind of opened out. This is Albert Einstein. One of the joys of looking at Albert Einstein's chart, by the way, have you noticed that whenever I send out an email, there's an Einstein quote at the bottom? Yeah, my reason for sending that quote is that when I was younger, I didn't know who to follow. I didn't know who to pay attention to. I had David Bowie's lyrics going bouncing around in my head. But whenever I looked at religions, I kept finding hypocrisy. You know, how can you have like land and gold, and yet people live in poverty on your land when you have all this gold? When the person you follow says, give everything away. It just didn't seem to kind of correlate for me. But so I thought, I know what I'll do. I'll pay attention to the person who's considered to be the most intelligent person that's lived in recorded history. And that's Albert Einstein. So when I read that quote of, we must widen our circle of compassion to embrace all living creatures, that's what I live out as best I can. We can't not kill things. When we breathe in, we kill thousands of microbes. When we walk on the floor, we're stamping on loads of creatures. It's impossible to metabolize without killing things. Even our body is 1 trillion cells in an organized community, and they don't last forever, which is beautiful in one sense because your skin is less than a month old. But, it would be nice if they replicate in a pristine way, rather than kind of lose their flexibility over many, many replications. But there you go. That's chronology in gravity for you. Yes. So for me, I kind of think, well, a lot of other people might be well-meaning, but I'll follow the person that is absolutely guaranteed to be highly, highly intelligent. And I love that quote. And if there's any of you that have Uranus or Aquarius in your 3rd house, or Uranus and Aquarius in your 9th house, then you can kind of just relax a bit and know that there's a part of your cognition that has a little glimmer of the same as Albert Einstein, which is a very cool thing to know. That doesn't mean, of course, that when you look at the birth chart of Heinrich Himmler, that you go, oh my God, Heinrich Himmler's got this or that in his chart, and I've got this or that in my chart, I'm a Nazi. It doesn't mean that, right? We do share something in common with all the people, from Buddha to Jesus to Muhammad to David Beckham to Margaret Thatcher and Boris Johnson. Most of us have a nose with an eye on either side, right? Most of us have one heart, unless you're Doctor Who. Most of us have one heart. So we do share commonality with all the good and the great and the despicable of the world, right? So when you're looking at bits of human nature, you will find there are parts of you that have resonance with people that you dislike. 50% of your DNA is shared with a banana. 99% of your DNA is shared with a chimpanzee. So, yes, we're looking at subtle differences in our human natures, really. This next one is someone that you might come to know. This is Howard Zasportis, the author of the book The 12 Houses that I mentioned, that you'll find in the book list. And when he was born, Gemini, the sign of writing, is in his 10th house of career. Good place for an author to have in their chart. So just to kind of allow you to get a bit familiar with the sense of things, but you see these planets are less kind of condensed, and this one is the least condensed of all. This is the Dalai Lama. He has the moon in Virgo in the 12th house conjunct Neptune, which describes him as a person who is unconsciously open and empathetic and deeply, deeply compassionate. He also cares for his population. He's got Sun in Cancer, the sign of the home and nurturing, in the 10th house of politics and career as well. So he's a political figure as well as a spiritual man. And he does them both very well. I spent a week listening to the Dalai Lama in 2008. And the first 2 days were at Nottingham Arena, and it was an open to the public thing with school children and things. And then the next 3 days, all those people went away, and it was about 1,000 people left that were part of a Dharma group, like a Buddhist group, and they wanted him to explain certain Buddhistic texts. And I went along as a guest, and it was all well over my head, but I could I followed about 97% of it. I was really chuffed that I could follow 97% of this stuff I'd never heard before. And then there was a gap, and the last day of this, I was invited to go and watch him debate with academics at Oxford University, and that was incredible. They had the head of all the departments, like life sciences and things, and the life sciences guy asked him the Buddhist position on vivisection for medicine. And fascinating experience. He's a very nice man with a funny sense of humour, and he does get annoyed sometimes, but in a really funny way, Yes. Now, by the way, I have to do a little bit of warning for you all. We'll just kind of remove that. Yes. as you know, you all have a model of reality. And your model of reality is comprised of things you've heard, things you've read, your experiences, the layers of meaning that you attribute to things, etc. Right? A bit of your genes and epigenetics kind of bundled in the mix as well. So we all have a kind of like a picture of reality, and like a jigsaw puzzle in a way. Now, every time you get a new piece of the jigsaw puzzle, that means you got a choice. You either reject the new piece of the jigsaw puzzle, or you break your jigsaw puzzle up and reconfigure it, incorporating the new piece as well. So there's a possibility that through this course, you might hear some things you've never heard before. You might have even heard a few things you've never heard before already, right? And that means your relationship with reality has already begun to change. So some people find, just through the experience of attending these things, the landscape of their reality changes. But that also means that your relationship with life might change, your relationship with yourself might change, your relationships with other humans might change, just to let you know, right? Now, there's a change that I've noticed that seems to happen a lot with my students, especially the people that have been with me for more than 6 months. And that is that they begin to transition from being opinion formers to describers. And what I mean by that is, imagine that you saw a person who, or you encounter a person who answers what seems to be simple questions with a great deal of hesitation. And if you said to them, what's 17 minus 4? Hmm. 13. Now, would you be upset because they took a long time? Or would you be celebratory because they were accurate? What do we want? Do we want speed when we ask a question? Or do we want accuracy? Do we want the first comment that surfaces out of the melange of the unconscious? Or do we want considered thought? It's different, isn't it? Depending on how you look at it, depending on what you're after. So now, if you encounter someone who'd had that much hesitation or deliberation, depending on your opinion of what's going on, you might form the conclusion that they are this or they are that. They are slow, or they are stupid, lacking in IQ. That's an opinion. After you've looked at astrology a while, a different thing takes place. Right? When you encounter someone like that, the first thing that happens in your brain is you go, they've got Mercury in Taurus. And suddenly, because you understand that they have Mercury in Taurus, it's okay. It's actually good that they communicate and think in a Taurian way. Or they might have Mercury in aspect to Venus, come up the same way. Now, when I was doing teacher training in the mid-90s at Swindon College, on something like the second day, I think it was, we had to get into pairs and do this round robin round the room thing. You had to get into pairs for a couple of minutes and just tell each other, what you teach. Right? So I kind of sat with this woman, and so I said, right, okay, well, I teach astrology and I teach NLP and I do a tour guide for Stonehenge and all the different stuff, all the hats I was wearing then. And she listened to me and after about a minute or two, I kind of ran out of breath and stopped. And then she told me what she did. And she said, I teach living skills to adults with learning difficulties. I said, oh, right. Do you mean like how to apply for a job interview and how to contact the bank? She said, no. We teach them, how to tie your shoelaces and how to brush your teeth. I went, oh, right. And the next day we teach them how to tie your shoelaces and how to brush your teeth. And then the next day we teach them how to tie your shoelaces and how to brush your teeth. And I was struck by the patience of this woman. She had almost like an angelic sense of patience about herself. And I realized that patience isn't some kind of gift that's bestowed by the gods if you're lucky, right? Patience is an emergent emotion that comes out of your sense of how you evaluate what's taking place in a particular scenario or circumstance. You see, it wasn't that the woman was essentially patient. It was that she understood that when these people went to sleep, they had an amnesia. Sleep would literally wipe their memory clean. So when they wake up in the morning, they were blank slate. No one had ever taught them how to tie their shoelaces. No one had ever taught them how to brush their teeth. So these very kind people in the world that seemed vaguely familiar but they couldn't quite put their finger on it, taught them how to brush their teeth and how to tie their shoelaces once again. And then they go to sleep and have the Groundhog Day of repeating. And these people, because they understood that their clients, their patients, wouldn't have any continuity of memory, they didn't expect them to have continuity of memory. And because they didn't expect them to have continuity of memory, they had zero breaking of their expectations, which meant they had zero frustration inside the body. And that zero frustration came out in their features, in the tone of voice, in the grace with which they held themselves. I learned a lot from that conversation. I learned more from that than I did in the rest of the whole teacher training thing. I thought that was such an invaluable lesson. So, I can assure you that I do not expect any of you to be a master of any of this stuff anytime soon, right? I expect you to be a novice, I expect you to be an apprentice, and I expect you to understand and comprehend and know at that level, right? So it's impossible to let me down. It's impossible to kind of cause me to feel disappointed, because all you'll ever do is be you. And that's what the art of astrology is. It's exploring the human condition for what it is, not for what you want it to be. Now, I had some students once, many years ago, in the days when I used to teach astrology physically in my house, before the online thing. By the way, I've been doing this 30 years, teaching astrology. I began in 1991. In fact, on the 28th of January, 1991. Of course, I would have the date of that, and the time as well, and the locations. I've got a chart for it. I also, I know when I began teaching online, I turned it into an online phenomena 10 years ago. In fact, on the 23rd of November, 2011. So, in fact, we'll be running classes. We'll still be together, when this has its 10th anniversary, which is a cool thing. But in the days when it was physical, I had a couple of students who had quite a lot of opinions about different people in the world. And one of the people they had strong opinions about was the President of America at that time. And the President of America at that time was a person called George W. Bush. And they had an opinion that this person was an idiot, really. Largely because he'd do things like end a press conference and walk into a wall instead of a door. Or he'd say something like, the enemy every day think about how they can hurt the citizens of America. And so do we. Right? And when you hear stuff like that, you just think, he's like comedy gold, really. But when you look at his birth chart, there are three possibilities. There are three correlations with him having the potential for dyslexia. Now, I'm a reincarnationist, which means I've been doing past life regression work for 31 years, and I definitely have a knowingness, for me, in continuity of soul. And I tend to look at astrology, and I tend to look at people as souls in an incarnated situation, rather than looking at a person per se. So when I look at a birth chart of a person, I'm looking at this archetypal mapping of the landscape of their psyche that soul is experiencing in this particular incarnation. So when I looked at George W. Bush, I said to the students, hey, let's look. So I printed this chart out and I gave it to everybody. I said, now, you look at, he's got this here, he's got this here, he's got that there. So this suggests that he's got dyslexia. And one of them laughed and said, well, that would make sense. I said, yeah, but just think on it for a moment. Imagine you're in the great planning room before you come down to earth, right? And you're in the great planning room and the great guides say, we think it's very good this time round for you to experience power in a powerless way, so that you can have the contrast between the two and learn from the juxtaposition of these things. And it'd say, like, what kind of way do you mean? Well, how about if you go down and you're going to be part of like an unusual dynasty? A dynasty, yeah. So you can have a powerful father, right? And then you have access to the power as well. All right. So where's the paradox come in? I say, well, you've got a problem with your neurology that means you get confused very easily. All right. And the people will be kind about that. No, you can't tell them about it. I can't tell them about it. No, because if it became known that you had an issue with your neurobiology, the power would be taken away from you and you'd never be able to fulfill your destiny as being part of a dynastic idea. Oh, so could you imagine what it'd be like to be dyslexic and not be able to get a diagnosis? And if you did get a diagnosis, you'd never, ever, ever be able to disclose it. So the only way that you could fulfill a part of your karma, your destiny this time round, is by having an impediment that you can't deal with properly. And when other people are in communication with you, they don't know that you have that impediment, so they can't take it into account. And that means that they would form the very rapid, without exploration, conclusion that you're a bit dumb, rather than you're a bright person who's got a kind of an awkward neurology. Could you imagine what that would be like to experience that? It's quite an interesting idea, isn't it? What do you think of that? I can't hear you. Yeah. What do you think of that notion of looking at someone like George W. Bush from being inside the person rather than looking at him?
It's more informed, less judgmental, more looking at the person psyche than the projection of what you expect.
Well, indeed. Yeah. And what it also enables you to do is step beyond the media impression. Because unless you actually know George W. Bush personally, all we've got to go by is the lensing that you get through TV.
Perception.
So, I mean, could you imagine what it'd be like at the next general election? That, by the way, every January I do a political forecast for the UK for the coming year. And we look at the monarchy, the economy, the people, the government, the arts, right? Every year. This January, I said that there would be trouble in Northern Ireland again, that Nicola Sturgeon would be in problems, the Tory party will run into all kinds of problems through the summer, and the Duke of Edinburgh might die. Doesn't always work out. The great meteor strike of 2006 never happened. But I talked about the riots of 2011 before that took place. So it's a useful guide. I've been talking about the economic crash of 2020 since 2015. So I knew that was coming. Which kind of means, in a way, that maybe COVID wasn't the full thing behind it. Yes. Anyway, that's common. But I've got a video about all that. If any of you want to look at it, I can share it with you. It's called The Astrology of Our Times. And it looks at the astrology of 2020 and right up for the next 20 years.
Wow.
So I'll share that with you guys if you like. It's just a YouTube link, so you can have a look at it. Yes. So I've noticed over the last 30 years that students have an increased sense of tolerance and that their compassion grows and deepens and it enriches, This topic weaves an enchantment and it's alluring. People are not odd or strange or normal, but they're examples of a cosmic arrangement, almost like these cosmic arrangements that reflect our diversity as expressions of the divine. So that gives you a bit of an idea of what to expect and a bit of a course outline. Like I said, my role here I see as more of a guide than as being a teacher as such. But we're just going to have a tea break in a moment, right? And when we have a tea break, we're going to have a 10-minute break. And in that 10-minute break, music will play. You'll find through the whole of this course that all the music is suitably celestially themed, right? Yes, later on, when we're looking at specific parts of our charts, you find that the music fits with exactly whatever topic we're looking at. And I do spend a lot of time sorting that out. So, But anyway, the reason for the music playing during the tea break is that it gives you an audio idea of what's taking place. You see, if you want to go off into your kitchen and get yourself a coffee, cup of tea, let the cat out, whatever, unless you keep in a strict eye on the time, you don't know when the 10 minutes is up. So that means you've got to keep coming back in and looking at the screen just to see if we're starting back again. But by having music play over your speakers, this means that you can wander off, and so long as you can keep an ear out, it's a bit like musical chairs. As soon as the music stops, that means we're back. So it allows you to gauge. You'll find that for the most part in these tea breaks, there might be, a couple, 2 or 3 pieces of music. So if you if you kind of listen in, you can start to get a bit of an idea of whether or not you're halfway through. All right. Now, just before we go, I'm going to ask you a question. Let me first of all get a line here. So let's have a. There you go. You should be able to see a vertical line.
Yeah.
Yep. Okay. How much more time? Probably about an hour and 10 minutes, roughly.
Another hour and 10 minutes.
Roughly.
Okay.
Yeah, roughly. Yes. Now, when you look at this line, there's a vertical line, and let's get a horizontal line. What is that?
It's a cross.
It's a cross. Anything else?
4 segments.
Chart.
4 segments, yeah. What was that? Someone said 4 segments, and someone said something else around the same time. I didn't quite hear it.
I said chart, but that's not the word I was looking for.
Ah, right. Okay. Yes. Now, all these things that you're saying, they're all interesting, but in actual fact, what it is it's either 2 or 4 lines on a plain background. But when you look at these 2 or 4 lines on a plain background, what your brain is doing is weaving them into a sense of meaning. And that's what astrology is. It's the art of looking at a representation and imbuing it with meaning. Now, is anyone here aware that the cross is older than Christianity? No? You didn't know that? Ah, right. Yes. The cross is far older than Christianity. An early form of cross looked like this. Have you ever seen this before, anyone?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Do you know what it is? What it's called?
Is it an ankh?
It's an ankh. Yes. It comes from ancient Egypt. In fact, this guy behind me, Anubis, is carrying one in his hand. And you can look at this in a variety of ways. You can look at it as the key of life, because he can hold the loop bit, and this looks like a key, even though they didn't have locks or iron, so they didn't have keys. So that's just a modern idea of what it might be. Another way of looking at this, of course, is that there's a receptacle, and there are 2 things opened to each side and something coming into the receptacle. So you can look at this as a fertility symbol as well. Depends on how you want to configure kind of meaning. Different cultures through time have used this symbol way, way, way before Christianity. For example, in the regions of the world that use Sanskrit as a language, they saw the sun as a spinning disc that would go through the sky. So on their cross, they put spinners to make it look a little bit like a Catherine wheel. Swastika is a Sanskrit word which means light, health, and well-being. And in traditional Hinduism, the swastika is painted red. Hitler took this idea, reversed the symbol, so therefore it was anti-sun, anti-life, and made it black on a red flag. So it was a reversal of the meaning in Sanskrit. In the Celtic realms, you'll find equal arm crosses. And in certain graveyards, you'll find a Christianized version of a Celtic cross, which look like this.
Yeah, seen that in some cemeteries.
That's right. Now, if this symbol of a cross is older than Christianity, the question is, what did it mean in the minds of people before Jesus? Because they couldn't refer to Jesus because he wasn't alive yet. So that's what we're going to explore when we come back from tea. And there's a very, very good astrological reason for doing so. All right. So we're going to go and have a bit of a break now and then come back in 10 minutes. How have you found this first part?
Very insightful.
Yeah, amazing.
Yeah, enjoying it?
Yeah.
Cool.
It's going to be a replay for sure because
Love it.
so there's so much to take in, but I mean, absolutely mind-boggling stuff. Yeah.
Excellent. Good. Because yeah, and this is the first kind of light little foray into things just to ease you into stuff.
Yeah.
Right.
Light little foray, right? Okay.
Yeah, indeed. Yeah. I don't know how to do shallow. I'm just not. I can't do it. I don't know what it is. So yes, right. See you back here in 10 when the music finishes. All right. Or put your microphones off, by the way, just so that you don't get feedback reverberating through your speaker systems. Okay. See you in 10. We're back again. Hello. Who's here? Is everyone here?
I'm here.
Hello.
Hello.
I'm here.
Yeah, good. Great. Katie's here. Michelle, are you back?
Yep, I'm here.
Yeah, cool. Dia, are you here?
Somebody messaged to say they couldn't stay to the end, didn't they?
Patty
that's right,
has got
Patty.
work to do.
Yeah, go off.
Yeah.
Okay, well, most of us are back, so we shall proceed. Okay, now I mentioned that this cross, if you like, can be thought of as having a vertical line, and of course it can also be thought of having as a horizontal line. We'll explore the vertical first of all. Now, a good way of doing it is just imagine, like, here's two marker points, right? And there's a space between them going across, from left to right. And here's another two marker points down here, and a space between them going from left to right. And if we just kind of mark this with a little wiggly wave, I do apologize for my wiggly waves. So you'll find through this that some of my sketches and drawings are a little bit basic, right? And that's, what happens when you have someone with dyspraxia who's trying to draw with a mouse, right? But you get the gist that it's a wiggly wave. So there's a wiggly wave, and here's another wiggly wave down here. Now, if the space between these two mark points at the top and these two mark points down the bottom was 1 second of time, what's the difference between these two waves?
One's longer, bigger, and the other one's smaller, right?
Yeah, but
The
remember,
gap between them.
but the distance between them is 1 second of time. So what's the difference in the waves?
Stretched.
I don't know.
No? The top one travels this distance in 1 second. The bottom one travels this distance in 1 second. What's the difference between these two waves?
One's faster than the other.
But if that's what I was thinking, but if they're both a second, then...
Yeah, this one travels this distance in 1 second.
Right, yeah.
One
Got you.
travels this
Right.
distance in
Yeah,
one-
yeah.
So therefore, it's their speed. Okay, so what's the fastest wave that we know of at our current point in history?
Electricity, light.
Light, indeed. So here's our, now, does anybody know the slowest that we currently know of?
I don't actually know.
No? Okay, so let's just get a kind of a spectrum here. So here's a sense of spectrum, and there's our kind of realm of light. And of course, light is often always used as a kind of a metaphor, isn't it? So we speak of light as being something to do with spirit or the divine or the universe, right? The idea of light, right? The slowest that we know of at the moment is minus 273 degrees centigrade, which is also called 0 degrees Kelvin. And it's at the point in which it's so cold that atoms stop. You know that scientists say that the universe is expanding.
Mm-hmm.
Have you ever wondered, how do they know that? Because to know the universe is expanding, that means you have to go outside the universe, look back and watch it move.
I've never really thought of it like that. I've thought of it as being, it's consistently moving.
Yeah, but how do they know it's moving? Because you can only know something's moving when you have a comparative evaluation.
Mm.
Yeah, you never wondered. Oh, right. Well, like if, of course, you've never heard a police car coming towards you. That would be laughable. Because you're all very wonderful people. You've never done any speeding or anything like that, right?
Never.
But
What?
but if a police car was coming down the road chasing someone else, right? What you find is that the sound coming towards you has a different sound than when it goes away.
Mm.
High pitched when it comes towards you, and it's low pitched goes away. So you get "Meow," rather than something towards you going what? Right? And the reason that it's high pitched coming towards you is as the sound comes towards you, the sound waves are compressed. So it sounds more high pitched. As it goes away, the sound waves get stretched out, so it sounds lower pitch.
Wow.
Now that's called the Doppler shift. And the same thing happens with light. So when light comes towards you, it's compressed. And so you get ultraviolet, the blue spectrum. And when something's going away, it stretches out. So you get infrared. So using modern telescopes, they can look at galaxies and star constellations, and they can see if it's red or blue. And that lets them know that things are moving further away.
Wow, how fantastic. Has that got anything to do with frequency?
That's right. Yeah, the frequency, which means the speed, doesn't it? Yeah, it's the oscillation speed. Okay, so if we have 0 degrees Kelvin down the bottom and we have light at the top, there are graduations in between. And these graduations have been given names by different people. And you can kind of, sometimes people follow these names, other times people use different names. In esoteric training, in Western magical tradition anyway, these kind of names are often called the astral plane. So here's a human being. We're not as cold as 0 degrees Kelvin, but there's the astral planes there, and there are different, it's said there are different layers. So there's the thought plane, the emotional plane, the mythic plane, and so on. And the difference between sleeping and wakefulness, the jump between sleeping, and that's a very powerful shift in consciousness to go from sleeping to waking. The difference between sleeping and waking is equal to the difference between each one of these ascending layers until you get to the divine, the source, or the light itself. So it's said that a mature soul, an aware soul, when they sleep, they leave their consciousness, leaves their body, and they can go home and they can actually access going to the light itself. For example, if a student is studying meticulously, when they go to sleep, they hover around on the earth plane, still studying in their sleep, and when they wake up, they're very tired. Because if your consciousness astral projects and goes far away from the earth while you're asleep, then you wake up with a refortified sleep. If your sense of awareness stays close to the earth plane when you're sleeping, you'll wake up feeling pretty tired. Now, around our physical body, it's said that there is a kind of like a realm that's not physical and it's not spiritual either. It's sort of halfway house between the two, and this is called the aura or the etheric plane. Have you heard of that? So you know that this aura, that it's said to kind of go around us, like some kind of boundary in a way. And there are some things that are said about this. Like, for example, it changes its color and it changes its size according to our mood.
Yeah.
So when we are in love, for example, it expands so much it can let someone else in.
Yeah.
And if we're in bereavement or shock, it shrinks. So you get this kind of cold feeling around your heart, and you have those days where things happen around you because you're not really aware of anyone else's thing. It's said that when you go over a humpback bridge or go down in a lift very suddenly, that your aura is stretched out of your body momentarily and it elastic bands back in again, which is why you get that whoa kind of thing going on. Apparently, I wouldn't know this, of course, but apparently, if you drink a lot of alcohol, it makes your aura flop about. It loses its consistency.
That makes sense, doesn't
So
it?
while your aura is flopping about, your body then tries to follow it. Right? I'm told, apparently, that if you smoke things called marijuana, it may, instead of it poisoning your aura, it makes little perforated holes, and you kind of steam and go that kind of hammers. It's not a good idea to poison your aura, I would have to say. Now, this might sound like a tangent, but it's worth exploring this little bit because it's pertinent to our exploration of this, which is pertinent to our understanding the anatomy of an astrological birth chart. One of my ex-students wrote once, this American lady watched the first class remotely, and she said, first of all, I just thought you were going off at tangents, but then I realized that everything comes back to the point you're making. And she said, this is a masterclass in storytelling, so I hope you form the same conclusion. Right, now, yes, this is the Egyptian version of what happens when we leave life.
Wow.
Right? It's called The Weighing of the Souls, and it's from the only surviving papyrus, which is the Book of the Dead. Now, in here, there's this chap who's behind me here. He's called Anubis. And in this context, Anubis is the gatekeeper of the dead. And his role in this context is that when you die, when you come out of your body, if you don't know where to go, he comes to meet you and he takes you to the great chamber where the others are waiting. This guy here is Matt, or Mart, depending on how you pronounce it, and he is all wisdom. This guy over here, who looks like he's making a record with something, he's called Thoth. Very interesting name. Thoth can be thought of as being spelled Thoth, as similar in structure, syntactic structure to the word thought, which is also similar to the word Torah. Anyone know what Torah is? No, it's the name. It's the name of the Judaic texts that go back to the Abrahamic writings. It's still being added to now, and it's also very similar to the word tarot as well. Now, yes, here's a tarot card. Just we're looking at symbols and how we feel when we look at symbols. How do you feel when you see that? Yeah. Yes, indeed. Although when I run a 3-part tarot course, I wouldn't use that imagery with that meaning at all. But it's a popular card, but there's something much better about it. This image, though, from the same deck, the Rider-Waite deck, is a little more puzzling. It's called the Eight of Cups. And cups in tarot represent the element of water, or in other words, emotion. And there are 8 cups, and they're all standing. So this lets us know that it's an emotional situation which hasn't fallen down. It's an emotional situation that's intact. But here a person is seen walking away from an intact situation. Could you imagine that? Could you imagine having something that's the height of its success and you abandon it while it's still successful? There's a sitcom called 40 Towers. They did that. They did just 2 series of 40 Towers, and when it was at its peak, they pulled the plug. And it stayed being something that revered all this time. It never waned. Very clever. Very courageous. This person is wearing a red cloak of courage. We know there's something odd going on because you can see the moon and the sun at the same time. This is an eclipse. And in ancient times, eclipses were thought of as portents of great change, sometimes harbingers of danger. This person is taking a very courageous path to walk away from an emotional situation that hasn't fallen down. It's like being in love and pulling the plug on the relationship when there's nothing wrong. Now, if this person, you can see that they've already crossed water. If this person continued walking without stopping, where would they end up?
In the same direction. They're going off the card.
Yeah, but if you continued walking,
On top of the hill.
Because I wanted to go to the mountain, to the rock, but it seems to be he's going to the side of it.
Indeed, but if he continued walking and never ever stopped, where would he end up?
Oh, he'd come back to the same place, wouldn't he?
He'd come back to the same place, indeed. And when he comes back to the same place, what does he find? He finds an emotional situation which is still standing. So there's a wisdom in here which says that the spirit in which you leave something predetermines the spirit of the reunion.
Oh, I love that.
Yeah. When I used to do pagan things, people used to end a circle with a twee little phrase. And I used to think, no, that's a twee little phrase, until I really thought about it. And they used to say, may we merry part and merry meet again. So if you can make every goodbye a wonderful goodbye, and remember to say I love you all the time, right? Then what you find is that that's what you meet. Whether that next meeting is at the end of the working day, whether that next meeting is next time round or on the bardo. You know, it takes a great deal of emotional maturity, but if you're able to end a relationship by saying, you know, go well on your journey, see you again, then it enables the two souls when they meet next time to meet without the friction.
Oh, that's cool.
That stuff just drops away. Yeah, I had a relationship that was ending in 1994, and this woman said something to me I just thought was wonderful. In fact, I turned it into the basis of a song. And she said, the only thing I'm kind of a bit sad about, she said, is that all the things we needed to learn together, we learned so quickly. So it wasn't the parting that was the problem for her, it was just the speed. I thought that was a great thing to kind of hear. What a nice person.
So did I, Katie.
Yeah. So now back here to our weighing of the souls. Now, what's happening here, you see, is that the soul is the embodiment of this bottle, right? And on one side of the scales, on the other side of the scale is a feather. And this is to see how light you are. How light you are. Now, I mentioned that Anubis takes you into the chamber where the others are waiting. The others are 42 gods and goddesses. And these 42 gods and goddesses have been watching the video of your life, including your private thoughts and feelings. And what you have to do is, see, this, you're not judged in this. No. This is like self-assessment taxation, right? You're not judged at all. You do your own evaluation. Now, we can do a little mini bit here. In my pro courses, we look at this in great depth, right? But just to give you a snippet, a hint, I'm going to say 3 sentences. And I want you to imagine, if you can, that in the room with you, there are angels, gods, goddesses, deities that know absolutely everything about you. And when I say sentence, imagine that you're going to repeat that in your own words, in your own voice, and imagine you're declaring it to the universe. And then the thing is to notice how you feel after you've said it, okay? It's the feeling in your body we're looking for, not your opinion, just the feeling that you have. Okay, you ready for the first one?
Yeah.
Okay, try this. I have never slain or murdered a human being in this life. So if you said that to a god and a goddess, how would you feel?
Truth.
Yeah, but how do you feel? What's the emotion in your body? Or the sensation in your body? Yeah, you feel all right with that, don't you? Okay. Yeah, try the next one then. I have never allowed my heart to burn with anger.
Can't do that.
And try the next one. I have never set my mouth in motion against another person. Ooh, Boris. Ooh, Farage. Ooh, Trump. Oh dear. Whoopsie. That means you're heavier than the feather. And that means you come in for another incarnation. And you keep coming round and round and round until
The lessons learned.
you're as light as a feather. Right? So literally the purpose of incarnation is to learn to be of light heart, that no matter what your circumstances, whether extraneous or benign, that you have within your heart a sense of being light and at peace, and you can respond with wisdom and kindness no matter what's taking place.
Wow.
And that takes a great deal of soul maturity to be able to do that. And I would say, of course, that it's impossible for us to do the evaluation now while we're alive, because you see yourself, you see the world, the universe through your the lens of your psyche, right? And I can let you know, no matter how intelligent you might think you are, you don't know everything. And you can't know everything, because a fox can hear a beetle walk on the floor, but you can't. A dog can smell you coming around the corner, but you can't smell your friend the same way. A shark can perceive electricity. There's no way that you have access to the entire spectrum of the lights. We only visually see a small portion of the light spectrum, right? So there are dynamics at play outside of our range of perception. So any human being that declares they know everything, no. What they really should know is the fact that they didn't know everything. Yes, indeed. So since we can't see ourselves fully and completely, and it's not your whole soul that's here in this incarnation anyway, it's only a part of it, that just facilitates the lessons you're learning this time round, But when you leave life, you see everything for what it is. Then when you look at yourself, you might find that there are some things you feel guilty about in this life that you needn't need to. And there might be some things that you don't feel guilty about that maybe you should. But you can't do that evaluation while you're alive. Right? So any attempt you make to evaluate yourself as being good or bad or right or wrong or enough or missing or lacking, whatever, is premature. So instead of doing that, just enjoy yourself instead. Right? You get to find out soon enough, And when you're in the great chamber, if you find out you're a bit heavy, well, that's all right. All you got to do is make sure that your virtues stand taller than your faults. And I kind of figured, well, when I was really young, I kind of thought if every person helped one person, the whole world would be fine. And then I thought, nah, but some people might be lazy, or they might lack capability. So if I help 100 people, then I'll be doing the other 99's job for them. So I spend my whole life doing my best to help as many people as possible to kind of help rebalance things up. So long as you've got the intent of kindness in your heart, you'll be fine. You can't breathe without killing something, so don't worry about that. Just do damage limitation as best you can. Because on the other side of everything, when you look at the equipment you were born with and the context you're in, or another way of talking about it, when you look at your chart, since those are the confines or structures in which the architecture of your inner landscape functions, that's all you can do with the best of what you have. And that's fine. Now, some people, like I said, kind of display these astral planes in a kind of a more literal way. This is an example from a book called The Healing Craft. You're going to get this as a handout, just so you can kind of think about this in a bit more of a mechanical sense, although I wouldn't necessarily be that mechanical with things. So that's our vertical, right? We have our vertical, which is spirit incarnated into temporal physical realm, this place of height, breadth, width, and time. I would say the spiritual people that talk about 5D, they go from 3D to 5D. What happened to number 4? What's wrong with the number 4? Where is it? Right? So, now Einstein showed us that time is relative to space, right? When you're out of this world, when you're astral projecting or when you're between lives, right, you're not in physicality anymore. So therefore time doesn't exist. Everything is compact into an infinite now, right? But as soon as you enter the physical realm of height, breadth, and width, you enter the realm of chronology. They're wedded together. So when we incarnate into physical matter, we also encounter time. So we now need to have just a quick chat about this horizontal. And the easiest way to do that, I'm just going to extend it out a little bit. And I mentioned Gustav Jung, or Carl Gustav Jung, a little while ago. So Jung had this really kind of nice way of talking about this. And he likened the day to like being analogous to a lifetime. So at the beginning of the day, the sun is weak and pale, and it can barely cast a shadow. Likewise, we're born into the world vulnerable, small and weak, and we can barely cast a shadow into the world. It's not until you get to about 10 o'clock in the morning that you can start to really feel the strength of the sun's rays on your arms. Likewise, it's not until we get into our 30s that it starts to become obvious that we have arrived and we're beginning to have some kind of dynamical power relationship with the world around us. And then the sun reaches its peak. And when the sun reaches its peak at midday, it can shine its light on everything, everywhere. And likewise, we're the same. When we reach the middle of our life, we can see all the things we've done and all the people we've met and all the people we've known. But we can also see all the things that we're going to do and then prepare for the setting of our own sun. So this horizontal line represents time. And when you put them together, we're a vertical, a spirit incarnated into physical matter, making a journey through time. And that is what I think this symbol meant to people before Christ.
Wow.
And crucifixion wasn't just something that Jesus experienced. It was a common, popular Roman torture device, right? And they used to do it because it was a joke. You see, they kill you by putting you onto the cross of life.
Definitely.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. Now this is embedded inside the architecture of an astrological chart. So let's just have that here. So here's a circle to represent our wheel. There's our horizontal line. And it's the other way around because we are in it looking out rather than out of it looking in. Right? And we have our vertical line in an astrological birth chart as well. So we'll focus on each one of these in turn. Now, this sign over here is the ascendant, or what's called the rising point of a birth chart. Now, when you look at this, has anybody here ever seen the moon rise? No? Never seen a moon rise? Okay. How about, have you ever seen the moon in the early part of an evening?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I see what you mean now, yeah.
And have you noticed that when you see the moon in the early part of the evening, it's huge?
Mm.
And then by the time you get to the middle of the night, it's a tiny thing.
Mm.
Yeah.
Yeah. Have you ever wondered why the moon changes size? No?
I just thought it's because when I'm driving or seeing it from a different angle.
Well, you're not far wrong in a way. Some people have said to me, oh, it's because it's moving further away. And it's like one of those kiddies' toys where you get like a bat with an elastic thing and a ball.
Yeah.
And they're going bedoing, bedoing, bedoing. The moon is not going bedoing, bedoing, right? What happens is that there's atmosphere, gases in the Earth's atmosphere, and they refract the light in a certain way. So anything that you see on the horizon looks bigger. So I take a lot of pictures of sunrises and sunsets and things and put them up on Facebook. And if you wait until the sun's disk is as close to the ground as possible, it looks bigger in your photographs. If you take a picture of the sun, when it's early or, up in the sky, the sun will look smaller in your pictures. So it's an optical illusion that whenever we see anything on the horizon, it looks bigger. So in other words, then this part seems to catch our attention. The opposite side of the wheel, oh, this is an example of the ascendant and the ecliptic, right? So if I just go back there again, right? So here's the eastern horizon, and there's the ecliptic arc going over our head, right? And where I live in what could be best described as a sacred landscape. It's an area between Avebury and Stonehenge, and I live on a plateau of sarsen stone in the ground, which is sandstone that's imbued with quartz. So I live on a bed of quartz, right? And I can see 7 ancient monuments from my garden. And here, because I'm on a very high hill, the third highest point between Bristol and London, there's hardly any light pollution, and I've got almost a 180-degree view of the sky. So one night I went outside and I noticed that this is the line of the ecliptic as you look at it in the sky itself. So I've put circles around these objects. These are planets. So this is Jupiter over here. I think it's Mars and then Saturn. So this is what that looks like in the sky. So there's the ecliptic, and here you can see the planets just as tiny little white dots. But to make it a bit clearer, there are the circles around the dots again.
Yeah.
All right. And this is where they are in the birth chart.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So this is,
Wow.
astrology and astronomy in real time, as it were. And that's what it would look like in an astrological chart. Cool, huh?
Mm.
Yeah.
Mm.
All right. Now, where are we? Oh, yes, we're looking at these rising signs. And so, by the way, here's an ascendant. To give you an idea, do you remember I mentioned about as things rise, you get this ascendant point? So this is a birth chart. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to step it in 1 hour increments. Right? So you notice that there are some planets here. They're kind of 3 together. And there's this kind of splay of planets here in an arc shape. Right? So 1 hour later, it looks like that. So the top has now moved over to here, and the arc shape has moved around a bit. And whereas at the beginning, the rising sign was at the beginning of Sagittarius, over here on the left, now it's at the beginning of Capricorn.
Mm.
And this is the Earth spinning in relationship to the celestial sphere. So it looks like it's moving around us, but in actual fact, it's us turning into it. And this is an hour later again, with Aquarius rising, and an hour later again with Pisces rising. So if I did that quickly, you get a little animation. Oops. Right. So there's our eastern horizon, and opposite, there's a descendant, the western horizon. And at the top, there's a thing called the midhaven. That's the MC, it's called. It's Latin, medium coli, which means middle heaven. And below, there's the IC, which is immedium coli, or the nadir, the bottom of the chart. Now, if this is a person standing on the horizon, they're looking towards the east. They're looking to where things rise. So we'll give this area a little bit of a kind of a thing. This is the first house and the 7th house opposite. So I mentioned that if you're looking in that direction, you tend to notice it catches your attention because something's coming up. Therefore, this means that you're not looking over here. So this part of a chart represents that which catches our attention. This part of the chart is behind our head, because if you're looking this way, you can't see what's over here. So in other words, this represents parts of ourselves that we disown because we think they're not there. It's an interesting idea. So this sense of parts of ourselves that we disown. To use an example, if there was a lady that had Mars in the 7th house, when she's young, she would disown her Mars. She thinks she hasn't got one. Or in other words, she hasn't got any assertive quality. She'd be the kind of person that says, should I wear this dress? Do I like this wine? Which food do I want? Completely unassertive. And after years of not being able to navigate life well because she's very unassertive, suddenly she'd meet an assertive person. And this assertive person would act as a role model for what assertion is. And he would say something like, wear this dress, eat this food, we're going out here. She'd think, oh, thank God, someone's taken the trauma of having to make decisions away from me. And she'd happily go along with this person who's making decisions for her. The only thing is, there's a very fine line between assertion and bullying. Right? A lot of people like to be led, but not many people like to be told what to do. And somehow you're supposed to gauge where the line is, right? But still, yes. Now, after a while, if this person starts to say things like, you do the washing up, I'm going out down the pub. After a while, she would become frustrated at this imbalance of power and eventually be forced to find a voice and slam things down and say, no, you do the washing up, I'm going down the pub. And then in that moment, she reclaims her own Mars. So what often happens is, by looking at this part of the chart, you can tell the qualities that you disown psychologically, that you then import into your life via another person. And then they act as models of how to do that behavior. And then when you adopt that behavior, you've learnt the lesson, which does mean that they're not necessary anymore because you've done the learning thanks by Torah. Right? So in other words, this part of the chart on the left, where the ascendant is, represents our sense of self, whereas this part of the chart on the right represents the kind of people that we align ourselves with so that we can master and learn more things. In other words, relationships. So the areas of life in these birth charts that are attributed with meaning aren't a joke, aren't an accident, right? There is actually a specific logic to the reason that they're placed in where they are. Now this line at the top here, this midhaven, let's just give that an area. This represents what's above your head at the time you take your very first breath, right? Well, and if you look up to these qualities, well, you know, if we look up to something, we admire it. And if we admire it, we want other people to admire us for having it, right? So this represents a pressure that you have, whether, you know, logical or not, that means that you feel that you should display these qualities to the world. And if you don't display these qualities to the world, you'll beat yourself up and feel guilty about it. Whether the world expects them really or not. But the easiest way to display qualities to the world, if you feel that you should show everyone that you got it, that is to literally make a career out of it. So if this line here is the horizon, then down here at the bottom, this is on the other side of the world when you're born. And you'd literally have to get a shovel and dig deep down into yourself. You'd have to go down to Australia to find what's there. So in other words, this represents qualities about ourselves that we can only find if we dig deep into ourselves. And one way of digging deep into yourself is through psychotherapy, self-reflection, years of meditation, contemplation. And it's quite often in the second half of life that we find the very qualities down there that we thought we didn't have when we were younger. And so when you look at an astrological birth chart, the very structure of it in its primary form has a cross built into it. There's the vertical, the horizontal, and there's the vertical there, running through mine. Okay? Yeah. What do you think of that?
Fascinating.
Yeah?
Totally like, wow.
Yeah.
Just to understand the psyche of people, ourselves, and how to work around it. And you just don't realize that's all there, set from birth. Wow.
Yeah, now, it is a bit of an ask, I know, because the audacious claim of astrology is that someone can give you the time, date, and place that something begins in the terrestrial sphere, i.e. on Earth, but by looking at the solar system at the time, date, and place from where it looked from that perspective, you can actually tell the unfolding trajectory of a person's life path and everything that they will experience before they leave this realm. That is some claim.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. Now, next week, we're going to look at that claim a little bit more. And we're also going to look at why that claim hasn't been endorsed or picked up by society as a wider whole. How come people really only know about the X factor end of astrology, and this Beethoven end is almost largely unknown by the general public. One little thing you're going to find out is that it's actually illegal for the BBC to have a documentary about astrology. It's against the law. And we're going to look at the reason that it's against the law. And it's not some kind of nefarious sort of kind of conspiracy thing, although there actually is a conspiracy to tell you about that is a factual thing. But in amongst all that, there's Napoleon. And that mystery will be revealed next time. We are done for today, my friends.
Fantastic. Wow. Amazing.
Have you enjoyed this?
Yeah, that was
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah? Cool.
Mm.
Excellent. So next time, I'll see you at 6:20
Thank
on
you.
Tuesday. Oh, it's a pleasure. And
Thank you.
yes, and we'll go further into things. I think some of the other things we're going to look at next time is the astronomy of the Star of Bethlehem. We'll talk about the authors of books as well. And we're going to have a chat about memory as well. And you'll find out that I'm actually not interested in what you can remember about any of this at all. Okay? And there's a very sound reason for saying that too. Okay, take very good care. I shall see you next week. Enjoy
Thanks, David.
yourselves.
Thank
Stay
you.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Bye.
Thank you. See you, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.